Marilyn Posner. Hello and welcome to this evening's program. I'm Marilyn Posner, former president of Beth Israel Congregation in Washington, Pennsylvania, and a member of the Jewish Community Legacy Project's Western Pennsylvania Small Congregations cohort. We are fortunate tonight to have participants from 3 of our cohorts, Western and Central Pennsylvania and Ohio. Before I introduce this evening's speakers, just a word about JCLP for those who have not been involved. Over the past 15 years, the Jewish Community Legacy Project has assisted more than 100 congregations, both movement affiliated and non-affiliated, to plan for both sustainable and preservation of their legacy. It is the only organization focused exclusively on empowering small Jewish congregations in the US and Canada to secure their futures by providing the resources and solutions specific to the challenges associated with operational growth, sustainability, or decline, the full life cycle spectrum of a congregational community. In addition to individual consultation, our cohorts have offered collaborative Jewish study and education, such as the program tonight. They also serve as a forum to discuss issues of mutual concern, including security and technology, such as Zoom, that has definitely provided us a way to get together during these trying times. On our behalf, I would like to thank Noah Levine and Steve Edelstein, JCLP staff, for all their work with our congregations. Now for tonight. I have been fortunate to have spent time discussing the saving of Jewish stained glass windows with both Alanna Cooper, an outstanding educator and author, and Jerry Orbach, a retired Cook County judge in Illinois, who has established his own way of preserving the legacy of small congregations' stained glass windows. Dr. Alanna Cooper holds the Abba Hillel Silver Chair in Jewish Studies at Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland. With a PhD in cultural anthropology from Boston University, her work addresses contemporary Jewish life in the United States, although her attention is global in scope. Her first book, Bucharan Jews and the Dynamics of Global Judaism, was published in 2013. But her current book project, Preserving and Disposing of the Sacred, America's Jewish Congregations, examines the ways communities acquire, use, maintain, and dispose of their material possessions. Alanna has been published in the academic and popular press with articles in Tablet Magazine, The Forward, Jewish Telegraphic Agency, Jewish Review of Books, and Lilith. Her writing is both interesting and insightful. Alanna also has held teaching and research positions at Harvard, Boston University, Hebrew University in Jerusalem, the University of Michigan, and the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. Alanna and I have bonded over the subject of Jewish stained glass windows and have become good friends as she visited us last year while we investigated the heritage of Beth Israel's windows. Pay close attention to the photos in her presentation, and you may catch a glimpse of my congregation's windows. Jerry Orbach's distinguished professional career includes serving as a judge and as an alderman in the greater Chicago area. In addition to the law, his love of Judaism and fine arts led him in the early 1990s to the idea of preserving stained glass at his Northbrook, Illinois community synagogue. For Jerry, this has become a passion in which he has personally made possible at his own expense in both time and financial resources, the relocation of window panels from 5 geographically dispersed former synagogues. Each time he included information that denotes the former home of the windows. After the presentations, we will have questions and answers posted in the chat feature. For now, it is my great pleasure to introduce Alanna Cooper. After her address, she will turn the program over to Jerry. Alanna?
Thank you, Marilyn. Thanks for such a nice introduction and for welcoming me and having me here to speak at this forum. Thanks for Steve and Noah also for arranging this. I'm really excited to be speaking here. I've met and spoken to a number of you over the course of doing my research, and it's nice to have this forum here. So I'm going to be speaking today about the history of American stained glass windows, American synagogue stained glass windows. For the most of my talk is sort of about the history. And then towards the end of my talk, I'm going to be discussing questions that congregations face when they merge, downsize, or disband about what to do with their windows, and sort of some creative solutions that some congregations have come up with. So when I speak about the history of American synagogue stained glass, I just want to start by saying that this is a really critical subset of American Jewish art, and yet it has not been studied in any systematic way. So a number of synagogues in the country have studied and published the past of their own stained glass windows, but there has been no scholar that's worked to try to synthesize materials from across the country and across time. And part of that has to do with the fact that stained glass isn't like paintings or a sculpture even, where we have galleries and we have collectors and we can bring things together and sort of look and compare and see trajectories over time. Because stained glass by its very nature is scattered. It's built for the institutions that it's in. And so it's hard to bring them all together. But today, in the era of crowdsourcing and sharing information and data and databases with images, it's become a lot easier to begin to start to think about connections that we might draw between stained glass windows in various synagogues throughout the country. And actually during COVID, one of the things that came out of COVID for me, one of those silver linings, is that myself, together with Sam Gruber, who's an architecture historian and runs the ISJM, it's an international study of Jewish monuments, we put together a stained glass working group where we've brought together archivists from congregations, art historians, preservationists, and we meet about once a month and we just talk about different things that we found through the course of our travels. And we've started to put together a database that's allowing us to make some kind of synthesize some of our information to be able to tell a story about the history of American stained glass. So what I'm going to do tonight is sort of a preliminary story that I put together based on culling information from a lot of different people's works. This is, as I said, crowdsourced. It's not all my own. And I'll present a sort of general overview now to give you some sense of how this art form developed over the course of American Jewish history. So I'm going to turn my my PowerPoint on. Oh, sorry. I just want to get this into the right view slideshow. Okay, can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'm going to start in Baltimore because this synagogue, the Baltimore Hebrew Congregation, which was built in 1845, is the first example that we have of a stained glass window in a synagogue in the country. At this time, stained glass is not yet developed, not even just as a Jewish art form, but even as an American craft in general. And Jewishly, there's no real precedent for using stained glass in synagogues. We have maybe one or two historical sources suggesting that there may have been stained glass or glass art in some medieval synagogues, but really no developed documentation at all. And what we have here from the Baltimore Hebrew congregation, the building no longer exists. And the only way that we know about this example is because the picture appears in the newspaper from the dedication of the building. And a little description of the building and just a tiny description of this little window up here, and presumably one on the other side of the building as well, described as colored glass of various tints laid out in the shape of the so-called Shield of David. So that's the sort of beginning. And we're going to see as I go through the talk from starting from this like very basic form to some very elaborate, imaginative, creative ways of thinking about what glass can do in a sanctuary. I'm going to move here to Kal Kadosh Beth Elohim, which is in Charleston, South Carolina. It's one of the earliest, the oldest synagogue buildings that's still standing in the United States. The congregation was also one of the earliest congregations in the United States, was founded in 1749. So before it was the United States. And the first building was built in 1792. It was at the time said to be the largest and most impressive synagogue building in the country. There was only a couple of them. The building was built in Greek Revival style. In 1838, there was a fire, and then it was rebuilt in 1840. And it wasn't until 1886 that the stained glass windows came in. And what I want to just spend a minute or two looking at the form and the lines of the stained glass windows. So we see, first of all, that it's we have two pairs, one on the right and one on the left of the ark. I'm going to show you the rest of the sanctuary. So you'll see also that all the windows are arranged in pairs. And when you look at these windows, there doesn't seem much Jewish about it at all, or even sacred about it at all. They're geometrical forms, repeating geometrical forms. And we only get a hint here at the bottom with these little medallions that there's something perhaps Jewish symbolism that's there. I turn to this. Yeah, okay, so this is an example of two of the medallions that are next to each other. They come in a pair, the 10 Commandments and a scroll of the Torah. And I turn to this image here of a church just sort of around the block from the synagogue for you to look at the stained glass windows here. And you can see again, they come in groupings of two. The coloring is very similar, this kind of pastel pale coloring and geometric forms. And again, almost nothing sets it off as a church window other than we have crosses here. So I just want to give you an idea here of the way in which at the beginning, much of American synagogue stained glass is just a response to church stained glass, or maybe I shouldn't even say a response to it. It's just a new art form in the United States. And the master craftsmen who were making the windows for the synagogues were the same ones that were making the windows for the churches. And along those lines of the kind of sharing of the artistic culture between churches and synagogues, I bring you this stained glass window from Congregation Beth Emet, which is a Reformed congregation in Albany, New York. They're no longer in this building, and this window no longer occupies the sanctuary space where it was originally intended for. This was from the building that was built in 1890, and you can guess from looking at it that it's Moses, and he's holding the 10 Commandments. This window was done by Tiffany Studios, which was, of course, one of the very important stained glass studios in the country at the time that really developed the art of stained glass in the United States in the early 19th century. And I wanted to just show you another window by Tiffany in Albany so that you have a sense that there's nothing, again, much Jewish. It is Moses holding the 10 Commandments, but the form, the clothing, the drapery, the way the style is done with the rolled glass is very, very similar. The only thing that really stands out, other than, of course, this is Jesus and this is Moses, but the only thing in terms of design that stands out as Jewish, which is quite interesting, is that Moses is framed by this archway, which is a Moorish, echoes of Moorish architecture, which was used in synagogue architecture at the time, echoing back towards the time when the Jews had their golden age, their heyday in Spain. This is actually Temple Emmanuel in New York, built in 1929. And these windows here, up here above the ark, were built earlier. And you can see, they're also Tiffany windows, and you can see that Tiffany's kind of done this faux architectural design in glass with the 10 Commandments in the middle. So it's very much like we have an echo here of Tiffany's design, with Moses is holding the 10 Commandments under this Moorish archway. And we see that here with the 10 Commandments under the Moorish archway in Temple Emmanuel in Manhattan. And I want to show you a couple of other images of Moses in stained glass, because this was, at this time, at the turn of the last century, as stained glass art was developing in the United States, depictions of Moses were pretty popular in Reform synagogues. This synagogue is, so we're all the way on the other side of the country, the Temple de Hirsch in Seattle. And the window that we're going to look at is not this one, but it's from the eastern wall of the sanctuary. So we don't see it, but it's behind the synagogue here. So if you walk into the synagogue, you walk into the sanctuary, see the ark in front of you, and you see this large Tiffany-esque, it's not by Tiffany, but a similar style from 1909, around the same time as that other Moses that I showed you. And again, Moses is there above the ark, very symbolically, he's above the ark, because as worshipers turn and open the ark and the Torah scrolls come out, or they see the Torah scroll, they have a sense by looking at this image of Moses that those Torah scrolls that are there in the ark are those, the very book of law that Moses gave so long ago to the people of Israel. What's remarkable in these images is the figurative nature of them, meaning for a long time, art historians have said, oh, Jews don't do figurative. They don't have people in their imagery in their synagogues. But here we see a total breakaway from that notion or that tradition, where this is a primary accepted symbol, is to have Moses showing up in the synagogue sanctuary above the ark. This one is, again, all around the same time period. The windows I'm showing you here are all within like 15 years of each other. This one is from Shereth Israel in San Francisco, California. And what's really interesting about this depiction of Moses, again, he's holding the 10 Commandments, but what's interesting here is that the artist, a French non-Jewish artist, he depicted in the background, we might think that it is Mount Sinai or the Jews kind of going through the desert. But in fact, this is a depiction, in the words of the artist, of Yosemite. California was thought of as the promised land, and the Jews had made it out west. And this was, for this Reformed congregation, they thought of their new synagogue, their new home that they were building for themselves out west in California, as a new form of a promised land. Okay, I'm going to move. So that's sort of one trend, is these figural representations. I'm going to move to another trend that takes off in the 20s and 30s, which is doing windows that, again, this looks like geometrical forms like we saw in Charleston before, with just medallions in the middle. But what's interesting about these forms here is, it's hard to see from this view. I'm going to zoom in a minute. The medallions each show something different. and they're showing a progression. They're not just randomly placed, but they're placed so that the worshiper can read a progression around the sanctuary, moving from here all the way around the sanctuary, where they can see the progression of Jewish history. One of the rabbis that did this sort of design showing the movement of Jewish history said, stained glass is, it should be seen as a form of a sermon in glass. And in this case, what the rabbi who helped to design it with the stained glass studio, his intention was that the worshiper should be able to look around them and to think about their place in Jewish history, and so that they were surrounded by the chapters of Jewish history. The other thing that I'll say about thinking of Jewish history as a progression is that at this time, there was a sense among Reform Jews, among the Reform Jewish movement, that Judaism was ever evolving, and that in the United States was reaching the sort of pinnacle of its existence in Western enlightened society. And so the final point, if we start from Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, and we move to the prophets, and then we move around the sanctuary, our final point is with this Liberty Bell, the freedom to practice and to be enlightened, to practice our Judaism in the United States. So we see here, we see here a picture of a medieval castle lake, which is supposed to represent the ghetto when the Jews sort of lived in abject humiliation in European ghettos. With emancipation, we see the chains here, the breaking of the chains of oppression, and then the Liberty Bell sort of reaching this culmination or final point of the development of Jewish history. Okay, now what I'm going to do is that takes us, that's just a kind of brief window into what was happening in the 1920s, 1930s. And now what I'm going to do is move to post-World War II, where we see a major change in Jewish style, of Jewish synagogue stained glass. And one of the artists who's really credited with a pathbreaker in this new style of stained glass is Alexander Raymond Katz. He himself was born in the United States, but to immigrant parents. And he trained as an artist. He did not train as a Jewish artist. That wasn't his thing. He didn't come to doing Jewish artwork until later in his life. But here we see, as a young man, he was living in Chicago, and he did work for the Chicago World's Fair, which was called A Century of Progress. He was one of the muralists for the Chicago World's Fair. And actually this mural won it became the sort of preeminent mural of the Chicago World's Fair. But after World War II, Alexander Raymond Katz made a decision to use his art interests and his art talents in a slightly different way, because what he saw was that post-World War II, there was a major explosion in synagogue building. And this was the explosion of synagogue building was due to a number of factors. One is post-World War II, there's a baby boom. There's money that's being spent where the national belt was tight during the war. Jews start moving to the suburbs. When they start moving to the suburbs, they build new buildings, and these buildings are large. They're large because they have the space, and they're large because they have children. And so they need more space in the sanctuaries, and they need classrooms as well. And what this means is there is lots of room to fill up with stuff. We don't want to leave blank walls. We want to beautify and decorate our buildings. And so the question is, what do we fill it with? And by this time, Jews were coming up with new ideas about what their architecture should look like, that their architecture no longer had to mimic old historic styles, but they could come up with a new architecture that expressed the essence of what Judaism is. And also, there was an idea that we no longer need to look to churches or to non-Jewish art, and we have our own artists now. By this time, enough Jewish artists had trained in the United States that they could turn their attention to working on stained glass windows. And it's at this point that we really have the emergence of Jewish forms of stained glass windows. And Alexander Raymond Katz is one of those early developers of a Jewish form. So what he says is, he publishes about his own work to explain why it is he's doing what he's doing. He says, we decorate our synagogues and meeting places with motifs that have no origin in our religious life. That was excusable when there were no Jewish artists, but today we have many who are able and talented. And so we Jewish artists who have done work like this kind of poster for the Chicago World's Fair can now turn our attention to beautifying our sanctuaries. And Alexander Raymond Katz had a very interesting idea about what it meant to do Jewish art. Because remember, we're not just talking about developing Jewish stained glass, but we're also talking about developing Jewish art. Like, what even is Jewish art? It's not clear. So Alexander Raymond Katz looked to Hebrew letters as a primordial artistic form. And he believed that by using the Hebrew letters, they had an essence, a Jewish essence to them, those letters can serve as inspiration for form, color, shape for all of his work. And so we see throughout his work in this latter period of his life, Hebrew letters appear over and over again. And in this sequence, it's a sequence of the prophets. I'm only showing you 3 of them here, but he has a number. This is in Richmond, Virginia. He has a number of, a whole series of the prophetic quest. And he doesn't draw the figures. He's not trying to draw Jeremiah, or not draw, illustrate in glass. Jeremiah, he's not illustrating what does Isaiah look like. He doesn't care what Isaiah the man looks like or what Ezekiel looks like. He cares about their essence, what they stand for. And so he chooses words, words for each prophet that capture who they were and what their message was. So Jeremiah is davar, the word, where Jeremiah, known as the prophet of doom, accepted God's call to speak to the people, to say his word, his davar. And Isaiah here is nachamu, comfort, where he offers, Isaiah so famously offers comfort to the Jewish people in the face of destruction. And we see at the top, and again, it's quite abstract and requires like training the eye to it. And it's actually a little bit difficult in this images here. I hope one day to be able to get there to see it in person. But one example of his comfort is up here at the top. We see God's hand, outstretched hand, and inside the hand, the bulging walls of Jerusalem held in God's hand. This is a comfort, nachamu, for the people. And then finally, Yechezkel, who's famous for his many things, but among his many visions, his vision of a chariot, which was sort of captured the divine spirit. How do we picture God? How do we put God into imagery? And Ezekiel does that for us with his description of the chariot, the fiery chariot, and Alexander Raymond Katz puts the chariot with these 4 creatures here and the wheels inside of wheels turning up at the top of this window and calls this window, this representation, kavod, or honor, the honor or the glory of God. So Alexander Raymond Katz is one example of an artist who didn't get his start by working in glass. He got his start through murals, through paintings, through sculpture, and he transitioned to do stained glass as a new form of expression for himself. Another example of that in the post-World War II era is Arthur Szyk. Many of you may have heard of Arthur Szyk. I'll show you a picture from his very famous Haggadah in a minute, but just a word about what we're seeing here. This is a picture from where I am, which is in Cleveland. This is the Temple Tiferet Israel, one of the really important Reform synagogues, earliest Reform synagogues in Cleveland. And in back, I don't know what Rabbi Abba Hillel Silver is conferring about here, but the reason why I bring this image is because in back of him are 3 stained glass windows that I'm going to focus on in a minute that are the artistry is created by Arthur Szyk. And this is the image which, if his name sort of sounds familiar to you and you can't conjure it, maybe you'll recognize from here because of his very famous Haggadah. He was a Polish Jewish artist. He left Europe in 1921. He left Eastern Europe in 1921. He traveled through Western Europe, trained in Western Europe, came to the United States a little bit later in his life, and was known as an artist, a book illustrator, and he also did famously political cartoons, powerful political cartoons where he railed against the leaders of the Axis powers. This was during World War II, and also very powerful Zionist cartoons. And Abba Hillel Silver, the rabbi of Temple Tiferet Israel, formed a connection with Arthur Szyk and reached out to him right after World War II, because Rabbi Silver was looking for a way to honor the fallen soldiers of his community, the young men of his community who had died in combat during the war. And because of Zhyk's interest and political proclivities and activism, he thought he would be the perfect artist. And Zhyk agreed. It's his only stained glass windows. They're here in Cleveland. He agreed to do the windows for the Temple Tiferet Israel. And they come in 2 sets. One is the warrior set. And so here Zhyk chose to pull from Tanakh, from the Jewish Bible, 3 very important warriors: Gideon from the book of Judges, and here in the middle is Judah Maccabee, and on the right here is Samson. And while these warriors are from Tanakh, they were expressly meant, the congregation understood that they were expressly meant to symbolize and to portray all of the soldiers from the congregation who had fought in war, and sort of making a connection between what they did for the United States, between what these soldiers did for the United States and a long historical tradition of fighting for justice and fighting for what is right. And the other thing that he did, in addition to these 3, was this: the picture is not good. It's a historical picture. This is all I've been able to find, but I just wanted to give you some sense of the layout here. This is the small chapel in the Temple Tiferet Israel. So it's not the big grand sanctuary. It's the small chapel where people usually gathered for Friday night Kabbalat Shabbat prayer services. And these windows here are a little bit simpler. I'll show them to you in a minute. There's 12 of them, and they each have emblems of the 12 tribes. Each one has an emblem of the 12 tribes, but in addition, they inscribe the names over the course of those 12, the 22 names of the fallen soldiers. And when the congregation recently, about 6 years ago, gifted their building in University Circle in Cleveland to Case Western Reserve University, and the building was turned into a performing arts center, there was a question: what about the windows? Do the windows belong with the building? Are they an integral part of the building and that's where they stay when the congregation leaves? Or do the windows belong with the congregation? Can we remove them from the building and take them with us? Are windows portable? And ultimately, because of the heavy significance of them, the congregation decided that they go with them. And what it meant was that the architecture of the new building had to, in some sense, be designed around these windows. So I'll show you 2 snapshots, one here of our 3 warriors. This is at the end of a courtyard, at the end of a corridor. and looking out onto this beautiful foliage in the background. And then when we walk into the new chapel, you can see that the buildings, the new chapel's in the round, and that these windows, which are those 12 windows, which I showed you, they wrap all the way around the sanctuary. These are the windows of the 12 tribes that hold the names of the soldiers. And so here the congregation has left their home in University Circle. They've moved to Beechwood. They take the windows with them, and with the windows, they carry with them the memory of their congregation's participation in fighting in World War II, and the memory of their soldiers. Okay, I'm going to skip over Ben Shahn, and I want to go to just speak for, let me just see what my timing is here. Okay, I have a couple more minutes. I think this is my last example before I move into creative solutions for stained glass windows when congregations merge or dissolve. So this series that I'm going to show you here is from Chicago. It's from the Chicago Loop Synagogue. The Chicago Loop Synagogue was founded in the 1920s, but this particular building that we're going to look at was built in the mid-50s. And Abraham Ratner was commissioned to do the stained glass for the sanctuary. And again, Ratner, like Schick, was not a stained glass artist. He was a well-known artist who did both Jewish work and plenty of not Jewish work. And only later in his career did he turn to do stained glass. The magnificent window that I'm about to show you is basically his only one. He did two other very small ones, but this is his masterpiece in stained glass. And he saw it in a way as really the culmination of his career, because he was a very spiritual artist, and he was constantly looking through his artwork to access the spiritual realm, the realm of the spirit. And he felt that glass was a very particularly powerful medium to do so. I'll read you this quote from him. He says, "Stained glass holds the capacity to be the sacred element through which the grandeur and beauty of man's imagination can be most powerfully expressed." And I think about this a lot when I write about and talk about stained glass. Like, what is it about glass that's different about a canvas, that's different about a textile? There is something magical, there is something grand about glass, because it's not static in the way that a painting is. And by that, what I mean is a painting is a painting. Stained glass, the way you look at the stained glass, the way you see it depends so much on the changing light behind it. And so the experience of being in a sanctuary with glass is enhanced by what's happening in the elements around us. So there's a sense that the glass is lively, it's not static. It moves, it shifts. All of us who've been in a sanctuary on Yom Kippur, as the sunlight changes throughout the day from morning to evening, have a sense of how the glass refracts that light and gives us a sense inside of the sanctuary of the movement of the day. So there really is something magical about stained glass that Ratner was keyed into in his own work. He spent 4 years working on this particular window, which I'm about to show you. About 2 years he spent coming up with the design. What would he do for the synagogue? He came up with the idea of, he called the piece "Let There Be Light," and he wanted to do a depiction of creation, the magic, the power, the grandeur of creation, and so eloquent in his artistic language, because what is an artist if not sort of working to imitate through the inspiration of God as a creator, God creating the world as an art form, the artist now sort of as the in the image of God creating art form to bring that spirit into the world. So here we see him doing a mock-up of his window, and he spent 2 years in France working in the studio of Jean Barillet, crafting it, actually creating the piece that was then shipped to the United States. And here it is, inside the Chicago Loop Synagogue, inside the Chicago Loop District. And I'll just point out one or two things here. This area of the picture here is the like power of where it happens. This thing is like magnificent. It's 30 feet high. It's 3 stories high. It's 40 feet across. And when you walk into the sanctuary, it like takes your breath away. And that is obviously what he intended. Here's the ark. Remember, we had those depictions of Moses in figural form, bringing the 10 commandments. Ratner doesn't need to do a figural picture of Moses, because what he says is like, here's the ark, here are the Torah scrolls. Up here, look at the flames. This is the burning bush. We can imagine Moshe here. We can imagine Moses here through these abstract depictions and this kind of massive explosion of light that helps to bring the divine presence into the sanctuary where the worshipers are. Okay, and this is my last example, actually, is from Washington, Pennsylvania, Maryland, as Marilyn pointed out, from the synagogue there, which I'll show just a picture of a very typical, lovely, mid-century modern synagogue, and lots of space in the sanctuary to fill and to add with, sorry, I showed the wrong image there, to put stained glass windows in. And being close to Pittsburgh, the congregation turned to Nick Parendo, who was the stained glass studio that did if any of you recognize this, this is the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh. And this image, of course, became famous, unfortunately, after the massacre that happened there. But we've seen this image many times. And what the technique that Parendo uses here is actually not stained glass, it's slab glass. So there's a kind of concrete matrix that slabs of glass are fit into. And the design comes from that. And he did all the stained glass in Beth Israel as well, in Washington, Pennsylvania. And what's really unique about these windows, what I really love about them, in addition to the color and the geometric patterns, is the very personal stories behind each and every window. The windows didn't all go up at once. The congregation didn't have money to build the building and the sanctuary and then put all the windows up. Instead, what they decided to do was one by one, donors came forward to pay and dedicate a window. And each window is a memorial window, meaning each window is given in memory of a particular individual. I point to this one because it's so powerful. And this one, it seems that the congregation came together to support their rabbi who had tragically lost his son in a car accident, his young son, who was just graduating from Brandeis. And they wanted to give some comfort to the rabbi. And so what they did is the way Parendo worked in his studio was people would come to him, they would tell him who they wanted to honor, and he would sit with them and say, tell me about the person. What were they like? What did they enjoy? What gave them fulfillment and happiness in their lives? What was their character like? And he designed the windows around those individuals. So this one, in loving memory of Gary Matzner, we see that the young man he was musical, he loved music, he loved his books, he was well learned and studied, and he had just come back from a semester or year abroad in Israel and fell in love with Jerusalem. And all of these things got integrated in the window. And we have a really eloquent letter from Rabbi Matzner, which Marilyn helped unearth for me. A wonderful letter from Rabbi Matzner to Parendo, saying, you captured my son in this window, and also acknowledging the fact that because it is a window and the light shines through it, that there's some sense, in a way like a yahrzeit candle serves, the flame serves as like a sort of flicker that you can't kind of put your hand on. There's something vibrant inside the window that Rabbi Matzner, in the words that he expressed, gave a sense that somehow it captured a little bit of his son's spirit. So I'm gonna turn in just a minute. Oh, that's a picture of the sanctuary with the windows there. I'm gonna turn in just a second the mic over to Jerry Orbach in Chicago, who's really dealing with this question and problem of what do we do with these windows that are more than art? They are more than just imagery. They hold the spirit of congregations and of individuals in them. They're so near and dear to congregants' hearts. What do we do when our congregation and our building separate from each other? How do we handle the windows? And I'm just just showing you a graph here of the number of synagogue congregations in this country over time. And you see here the big boom that I spoke about just post-World War II. But basically throughout American Jewish history, the number of synagogues in this country was continually increasing. And it's not until the 1990s or early 2000s where the number of synagogues that are closing up each year is more than the number of synagogues that are born or that come into existence each year. And this graph that I'm showing you here, in between 2000 and 2020, by the way, the numbers aren't great. This is rough, but it seems that the number of congregations are holding steady now. But I bring this here, the orange represents the Orthodox movement and the gray represents the liberal movements, conservative, reform, reconstructionists. So we see that the Orthodox movement, the number of their congregations is growing, while the number of reform and conservative synagogues is shrinking. And so what that means is that this holding steady kind of masks the fact that a lot of conservative reform reconstructionist synagogues are being emptied out. And so the question of what to do with these windows, with these sacred treasures, really is a pressing one. And I have a lot more to say about it, but I want to give Jerry a chance because he is right in the middle, right at the heart of trying to not just think about the problem from a theoretical perspective, but hands-on doing something about it.
Okay, I guess I'm on at this point. I sort of began my quest quite a while ago. I'm what you would call nowadays a picker. I would go around to junk stores and look at things. And I was in an architectural salvage store one day, and I see out of the corner of my eye a large window, which I remember literally davening under when it was the on Shemet on Patterson Avenue inside my community that I represented as the alderman. I davened under it because almost on a nightly basis, the Rebbitzin would call me and say, "Come on, alderman, make a minyan," because that's what they needed. It was an Orthodox synagogue, had been a traditional synagogue prior to that, became Orthodox and later became conservative in a different location. The synagogue did eventually close, and I really didn't know what happened to all of the artifacts. So I was shopping in the store, and out of the corner of my eye, I see this window. I walk over to it, I pull it out of the rack, and it's fairly large. And it was a Frank Lloyd Wright building. It had two Prairie School keys on the side of a Magen David in the middle of the window. So I asked the owner of the store, I said, what he wanted for this window. And he looked at me and said, if it wasn't for the blank blank star in the middle, I could have gotten a lot of money for that window. But because of the blank blank star, I can't get a lot of money. So I didn't give him a lot of money for the window. And I do have that window hanging in my house. That was my very first acquisition. After that, I sort of thought, what do I do with this? I took the window to a friend of mine by the name of Chris Body. It was Body Studios. Body Studios is they're the official keepers of the glass in Vatican City, as well as having just done St. Patrick's Cathedral and the Park Synagogue. They just cleaned and refurbished the windows in the Park Synagogue as well. I took it to my friend Chris Body at that point because one of the panes was broken in that window. And he said, oh, wow, he says, I've got a lot of old glass in the basement. And I went down into his basement and he had rows and rows and rows and rows and rows of glass. I said, Chris, where do you get this? What do you do with this? He said, well, the Archdiocese in Chicago has hired me to retrieve the glass out of windows of churches that are decommissioned. And when a new church is built, we put the new glass, we put the old glass into the new church, and that sort of is a transference of sacred space. That's what he said. I thought that was a terrific idea because I knew that Jewish glass was being destroyed constantly. So I went to the Jewish Federation. I told them about a project I had in mind. And I guess they looked at me like I was crazy. And, who saves that stuff? Nobody saves that stuff. Why would you save that stuff? Well, after trying several other charities, I decided to begin saving the stuff myself. I think, Noah, you have some of the photos that I sent you. Can you put some of those up, or can I access them and begin showing them to some of the folks? So what I decided to do at that point is, the first place I went back to my old synagogue where I went to Hebrew school, where I was bar mitzvahed, and the very last Jewish thing that ever happened in that synagogue was my wedding. And I've been married almost 50 years now, so that's how long ago that wedding was. And immediately thereafter, it was sold to a Korean church. Well, I couldn't get much out of the Korean church because I couldn't speak to them. But I kept going back to the area, looking at it. And one day the building was cleaned up, the gang graffiti was gone. And this is a different set. I'll get to those in a minute. The graffiti was cleaned up and it was a Hispanic church. And I went in and I asked the pastor if I could purchase a window, because I remember sitting there as a kid getting lost in the windows while everybody was davening. I was getting lost in the windows because the davening as a kid was sort of boring, but the windows were very exciting. And he looked at me and said, well, those are the windows of the broken covenant. We really don't like those. No, okay, that's good. So I said, I'll take all of them. And what I arranged was an exchange. I created New Testament windows for them, and I took out the Old Testament windows. And Noah, can you give me, if you can set up all the pictures, and then I can go to which ones I want at that point. That last set was from Michigan. Okay, so these windows, can I, photo 3, can you put up photo 3, Noah? Hello, photo 3 or 3, 4. No, they're not coming up. So, and these windows, if you do a double click, you can see, you can probably bring them up. There we go, there we go, there we go. These windows were created by a Lithuanian artist by the name of Becker. His son now lives in Israel. They thought the windows were lost. They're doing a retrospective, a book on all of this, all of Becker's creations. And they actually put an ad in the Jewish press. I saw the ad, and I had my rabbi contact this fella in Israel, and they came and they took photos for the book that's going to be published. Can you do the next one? Well, as you can see, these are windows that depict the holidays. You have Pesach. You have Pesach here. You have Shavuos. You have the it's so small at this point. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Here you have Sukkot. We have Nesrog and Lulav. You have a Sukkah, and then some random windows. We have Purim at the end and Hanukkah at the very end. These windows had a tendency of giving you the year. And this is one set. There was another set of, do you have another picture you can put up, Noah? So what those windows did is they took you through the Jewish year in the holidays through the year. So as the holidays approached, you could concentrate on the windows that you liked. These were very small windows inside very large amber windows. It was a large amber window with a small panel inside. Okay, Noah, can you put up photo 5? Let's see, are we getting to photo 5? And those windows actually flank the sanctuary in my old synagogue. Photo 5, these were in the hallway of my old synagogue. These are, right now I have the red trimmed windows on 2 sides of these windows. The large central window was a window that you literally walked into the sanctuary. You walked into the building and it was over the 3 front doors. The other windows were 5 windows on the 2nd floor where the sanctuary was. Right now, they're all in a row in my sanctuary in Northbrook at this point in time. I fell in love with those windows as a kid. I bought them, I restored them, and brought them into my sanctuary. Once I did that, I figured, well, there may be other places that have a similar situation where the shul became a church. If you can put up photo 12, Noah. We got that one coming up. At this point in time, I have 5, if you can enlarge it, I have 5 synagogues hanging at the shul, in my shul right now. We have 6 synagogue windows. The Kingston, New York windows have been delivered and frames are being prepared for them right now. What I do is I encase them in cabinets and I light them with LED lights from behind. This archway was on the 2nd floor of a synagogue called Mikro Kodesh Anshe Titkin. Mikro Kodesh Anshe Titkin was a synagogue in the Budlong Woods area of Chicago, but it originated in the Maxwell Street area of Chicago early on before it merged with the Budlong Woods Synagogue. These windows were above the entrance on the 2nd floor. Getting these windows was very difficult. I knew they were available. I knew the synagogue had closed. I called the people in charge of the synagogue. They said somebody else wanted them. I said, okay, long as somebody is going to preserve them, that's fine. They then called me on a Sunday, and the rabbi who was then in charge said, "Nu, Yankel, that's me, what are you going to do with the windows?" I said, "Well, I thought you told me so-and-so was taking them." He said, "Well, he never called me back." I said, "Okay, well, I'll put my crew together and we'll go in and we'll take them, we'll get the windows. It'll take me a couple weeks to put a crew together because these started on a second level and went to a third level, and we needed scaffolding for it. He said the building's being torn down on Wednesday. This was Sunday night. On Wednesday, I got there with my crew. We put up the scaffolding while the back of the building was being torn down with bulldozers. We were on the front wall pulling these windows out. By the time 10 o'clock in the evening when we got done, the wall we were on was actually moving because it was the only wall left and there was nothing else supporting it. So that was a pretty scary wall, pretty scary project. And what we did with this is we have in my sanctuary, in my shul today, we do have a very tall, very large sanctuary. We seat 1,200 on the high holidays. And these windows were, as I said, encased in a large arch. The memorial plaque is in the middle of the large arch. On the top, you can see a Sefer Torah with a hand holding a yad. You see the luchot, the 10 commandments, on the which would be everybody's right side at this point. You see in there Tamid, you see an Esrog and a Lulav, you see a Megillah, you see a Shabbos, you see a Pesach window on the bottom. On the left, you see a Shabbos window and an eternal flame above a stylized menorah with the word shalom coming out of a shofar. These windows would have been lost had I not gotten to them in time. I think Alanna said that, how do you take all of these windows from all a bunch of different places and sort of like a mishmash, and you put them all together? Well, I have to tell you, it works. It works very, very well. When we first moved into this particular building, 3 congregations had merged, and the building was hospital-esque, if you will. The walls were blank. The walls were white. There were a couple of podiums in front that were mismatched. The shulchan in the middle was painted orange. It wasn't a pretty sight. It was a beautiful building, but they weren't able to keep it up. So 3 congregations merged and brought the building back, and then it just needed some life. And the windows bring an incredible life into the building. I happen to believe that the windows have a life of their own. They have a ruach of their own. They tell a story of congregations that have been in the past, very popular. They had, generations had gone through these congregations, and yet they're lost to time, but for the savings of these windows. It's almost impossible to save memorial boards, although there is a method of doing that right now because you can record them all, put them on a TV screen, and roll them, and a computer can put the memorial dates up anytime that's necessary. It's a process I'll talk to Alanna about. People worry about their memorial plaques. Well, that can be saved through computers and television screens right now in synagogues when synagogues merge. You don't have to take up entire walls with old memorial plaques. So we did that. Noah, can you put up another?
I think we're coming towards the end, and I want to
put up one more set for me, please.
Sure. Okay.
Okay. And this is a different style of window. This is a Dal Devar window.
Okay, one more.
Okay, that's photo number 1.
Okay.
Okay, photo number 1.
While I'm enhancing it, if you have any questions, put them in the chat. But also, we're going to send an email to all of you afterwards. So if you have questions that you think about afterwards, send them back and we'll send them to Alanna and to Jerry, and they'll respond and we'll get back to you that way. Okay, Jerry.
This is a Dal Devar window. It was designed by Chris Body's father, Ettore. Ettore was a liberator of the camps during World War II. Ettore won 2 Bronze Stars at the Battle of the Bulge, and he took this window on to create himself. They are not Jewish, needless to say. But this was a history of the Jewish people. You have Moshe Rabbeinu receiving the Luchot, receiving the Torah from God. You have your Torah scroll. You have the Western Wall, the Temple period. You have the destruction. You then have the Holocaust, and from the Holocaust comes the state of Israel. This was Ettore Body's idea of the history of the Jewish people, from Moses on the mountain through the Holocaust to the creation of the state of Israel. The archway in the middle is how you walked into the synagogue. This was the entrance wall to the synagogue. This is 20 some odd feet high and 40 feet wide. And it was also encased in oak, but due to the fact that it was Dal Devar, these are structural pieces. So each of the pieces can sit on themselves. And you don't have to create a structure to hold them. They become the structure themselves. But with this, once again, a very, very famous synagogue in the city of Chicago, its memory is retained within this glass, within our synagogue. As I said, we now have the windows of 6 synagogues. We have 5. The 6th one is being put up, will be put up when I return from Arizona. The frames are being made right now. And we will have room for more. Aside from that, I have other people that are asking me. I've now, thanks to Alanna, people have called and asked if I could provide windows for them. And I'm more than happy to do that. I'm more than happy to acquire as many windows as I can and then distribute them to any synagogues that need them or want them. The light of the windows really give an incredible ruach to a congregation and to its sacred space. It creates a beautiful space.
Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, Alanna. Marilyn, do you want to? But you have to unmute yourself, Marilyn.
Yes, I'd like to thank both Alanna and Jerry for your excellent presentations and for all of you, for all that you are doing to preserve synagogue legacies. I'd like to now open the floor to questions and comments. Please post them to the chat feature and Noah and Steve will expedite our speakers answering them.
There was one question that came in earlier. Alanna, what are options for synagogues that want to save their stained glass windows? Unmute yourself, Alanna.
Yeah. What are options for synagogues that want to save their stained glass windows? I guess my question is in what context, meaning a synagogue that's moving to another building or that's dissolving, or
if a synagogue is going to be closing, if it's going to be closing down, and if they sell it and the building could be totally razed.
You know, there's no central repository. I mean, that's how Jerry and I found each other, because Jerry's the only one in the country that's doing this kind of work. It's not like the Catholic diocese that's doing that sort of thing. So I've seen creative sculptures made from stained glass windows. Listen, the problem with the stained glass window is that it's designed for the building. So and usually they're designed in a set. So it makes it really hard to take them out and to give them somewhere else. And I think, like, in addition to the creativity of what Jerry's doing, he's also, he's the funder of the project. It costs a lot of money. I think that if a synagogue is interested in giving their windows away, to another institution, maybe to another synagogue. I think that if they're able to, if they have assets and they're able to gift the windows together with some funds that make it more appealing for another synagogue to take it, that's helpful. Other than that, you know, museums are very, very difficult to give the windows to. I know of only like one museum that's taken a full set. That's the Skirball in Cincinnati. Some museums will take one of the set, like a local museum might take one of the set as an exemplary piece. But it's a really difficult question. It's not easy to answer.
We at JCLP have congregations all over the country, and that's the number one concern that they may have. Jerry, did you want to add to what Alanna said?
Well, all I could tell you is that it was a little sad when Alanna said, I'm the only one doing this, but having been a founder of my shul and now the executive vice president, they won't throw me out when I tell them we're going to use our large storage facility in the basement to take full sets of windows, and this will catch on. I guarantee you this will catch on. And as new synagogues are built, we will advertise that we have available for them windows that will enhance their sacred space. And I have to tell you, to create these kind of windows is cost prohibitive. It's literally cost prohibitive.
You mean from scratch?
From scratch. It's and you don't even have the artisans that can do it any longer. That's also part of the problem. If you want, you know, I go everywhere from in the shul, you know, Alanna, I go everywhere from very traditional windows to the new windows that I got from Kingston, which are abstract, modernistic, and they all work. They absolutely all work. I mean, I will run out of room in this one particular, as Alanna calls it, genitza for stained glass. I will run out of room. Upstairs, downstairs, that's another story. I can store, I can arrange, I can tell people how to complete projects and show them what we've done. The windows can be preserved. The only thing I insist upon is that next to each set of windows, I have a history of the synagogue they came from, and that helps preserve the memory of the synagogues themselves. So it's a repository not only of glass, but of the memory of the synagogues that they came from. And that would be a requisite, and in case anybody wanted a set of windows that I would have, the requisite would be they would have to list the history of the synagogue that it came from, and they'd have to put it in a plaque next to the windows.
This is in Fitzgerald, Georgia. They have 40 stained glass windows throughout the entire congregation. And what Alanna had said earlier is that each window is in memory or in honor of somebody. And their challenge is when you have only 11 members in the congregation, the challenge is what happens. And they're talking to the city, you know, because they made the decision they're not going to raise the building. And I imagine that on this Zoom call, there's a number of you that have congregations that have stained glass windows that are asking the same question. We're really good at asking questions, but coming up with answers is a real challenge. Alanna, you were going to say.
No, yeah, I mean, one thing that I've seen congregations do that I think is really interesting is to think of the window, because it's so hard to move a whole window, is to think, is there a part of the window that's particularly meaningful? So let me just show you an example of what I'm talking about. There's your windows, Jerry. Here. So this synagogue is Tiferet Israel in, hang on one second, I just want to do a better screen share. This is Tiferet Israel, Tiferet Israel in Erie, Pennsylvania. And it was a building that was built in the 1920s. hold on, I'm coming to it. Here it is. In the 1920s, and it has this beautiful dome, and all around the drum are these really large windows. And the congregation moved, they had to downsize and leave where they were, and they moved, they were able to build this new kind of modern low slung building. And the aesthetics of those windows and the size totally did not fit in. So what they did is they sort of isolated that the part that was most, that they felt was kind of most important or had the most symbolism or connection to them was the middle panel from each window. And so they just pulled the middle panel out. And then they used that to kind of, they had their own craftsmen and they used all those middle panels. They're no longer windows. They no longer serve as a window because the whole architectural design is different, but they serve as a kind of sculpture, a glass sculpture of memory. So I've seen a lot of sort of creative solutions like that, where if we can only take a part, we want to preserve the memory, even if it has the says who the window is in memory of. Some congregations will just take that plate and use those and kind of organize them as almost decorative memorial boards in glass.
Marilyn?
Okay. Well, we have obviously had lots more than we expected, but there's more to come, but not tonight. So I do want to thank Alanna and Jerry for a wonderful job, and Noah and Steve for organizing all of this, and all of you for joining us and for your support of small congregations in your area. We look forward to your joining us for future programs. Good evening and stay well.
Thank you. Thanks, Marilyn.
Thank you.